Hey guys, welcome to the Ramsey Paul Show. It is Thursday, November 6th, and I'm not really going to do a news update today. It's sort of the same old today. I wanted to dig deeper into what happened with New York City. We had a new mayor that was elected there, Zohran Mamdani. Whoever thought we'd have a mayor of the United States' largest city be Zohran Mamdani, a Muslim who hates white people. And that's where we are. So it's like, well, how do we get there? How do we get there? And this really illustrates a civil war that's going on within the Republican slash conservative movement. And it's interesting because in some ways I think I was a little ahead of the curve, not myself. A lot of people were, but I was discussing issues back in 2015 and 16 that people like, I'm sure, Tucker Carlson or Matt Walsh, they would have nothing to do with me. Oh, no, I can't even be associated with that. And now I hear all these people, they're sounding like Ramsey Paul. And I'm not saying that to pat myself on the back or anything like that, because a lot of other people came before me and had a bigger voice, and that's great. That's great. But it's interesting how things have changed. And what has happened is the conservative slash Republican premise, really since World War II, I believe is false, is based on a false doctrine. And a lot of conservatives, they're starting to see reality that what their premise was is not true. And it's like, oh my God, what did we do? Okay, so what is the premise? The premise, really, since World War II, has been there's nothing worse than being, I think, first anti-Semitic. That was a big one, anti-Semitic, because although the Holocaust, although after World War II, the term Holocaust didn't really exist. That started about 1978, but it sort of built up like, oh, we can't disagree with Jews because it kills 6 million of them, and that's just horrific. So we got to watch out for anti-Semitism. They still use that logic today. If you disagree, for example, with funding Israel, oh, that means you have hate in your heart towards Jews, and obviously you're advocating for the Holocaust. And oh, you can't even discuss the Holocaust. It's beyond question. It's become a religious thing, and so we still see that. But then that in the 60s, 50s, and 60s, besides anti-Semitism, we had this whole idea of being racist was the worst thing in the world. And there's nothing more evil than being racist, the Ku Klux Klan and all that type of stuff. And since then, all these ists have multiplied. We had the sexist that came in the 70s. Like if you think there's differences between men and women, that's sexist. And recently, in this century, we've had Islamophobia. They started to add phobia, or homophobia, or transphobia. So they have all these words that, as a conservative on the right, the playbook for these conservatives is we can never do anything that would make me be called anti-Semite or made me called racist, or and then these newer terms, they're not as strong, like sexist, homophobe, and all that. It depends, but definitely anti-Semite and racist are taboo. You can't be those things. So the modern conservative movement, they had this guardrail around them that said you can just exist in this space. You can do whatever you want, and you can advocate any policies that you want, but it must never be anti-Semitic or racist. That's the rule. Otherwise, we're just going to throw you into the void. So if you want to talk about tax cuts, okay, we may disagree with you on that. You may want to do capital gains tax cuts. Okay, you can argue for that. You can argue about different healthcare policies and stuff like that. But anything race related, or especially anything to do with Israel, or in general, Jewish influence is off the table. You can't talk about that whatsoever. In fact, when it comes to Israel and that lobby, you need to be subservient. That was sort of the rule. So the conservatives, they went along and their whole identity was based on this. And it was based on the premise that these words were factual or they had real meaning. They didn't understand the deeper meaning of these words because these words are simply just anti-white. We shouldn't use these words. And in fact, if anyone says the word racist or anti-Semitic, our first response should not be, "Oh no, I'm not racist. I have a black friend," or "Oh, I'm not anti-Semitic because I have a great Jewish friend." That's the typical way conservatives respond to that. And it's not a good thing to do because when you act in that manner, you are validating that the worst thing in the world is to be so called racist and anti Semitic. Like that's a horrible thing to be. But what does that mean exactly? If you think about it, it is anti white because being a so called racist, and I don't like to use that term, it just means you have preference for your own race or your own people. And for every other race or ethnicity, that is fine. So if you're black and you want to have a black club, that's great. In fact, we're going to encourage it. If you're in a corporation, you want to have association of, I don't know, black engineers. Yes, we're going to celebrate that. Or if you're black and you say, hey, I want to see more black head coaches in football, or I'm going to root for this team because there's more of my brothers on that team. And that's perfectly fine. No one objects to that. And if you want to have your own black only spaces, that's great. And not only black, but Jewish are the same way. You know, they get their homeland in Israel and they can have their clubs, Hispanics, you name it. The only people that aren't allowed to have that are white people because it's evil for us. And it's obviously a double standard. So when other groups do these things, they're not called racist. And if you try to call them racist, it doesn't really stick because what racism means is just anti-white. It's just saying that you white people, you cannot engage in identity politics. We can though. And obviously that works to their advantage because if we're fragmented, we're weaker. But this is the rules that they put in. And so people just assume these rules are good for some reason. And the conservatives I met. So conservatives, they get frustrated because they say things like, oh, identity politics is so evil. We should, just identify as Americans, or we all bleed red, or I don't care about your skin color. Just silly things like that, like racist skin color. It isn't. But they just say all this type of things. And then they get mad at the left for having these so-called double standards. But the left doesn't care because the left doesn't internalize it that way because they see racist, when they say racist, that means a white person that has a white identity, and that's evil. And the same with Jewish people. They use anti Semitism. There's no equivalent. There's no like anti Goyism, like you accuse a Jew of being, oh, you're anti Goyistic or something like that. You got to be canceled. Oh, you got to go, instead of kissing the wall, you got to go to Rome and kiss the cross. Yeah, there's nothing like that. It doesn't even translate. So these are words that were meant from the beginning to attack white people. And they were really good at this because it convinced a lot of white people in their sense of fair play that white people are the villains in history, which isn't the case at all. White people have lifted the whole world with science, medicine, feeding people. It's just really crazy. Ending slavery, all the other races participated in it. But there's been a lot of propaganda that we're especially wicked, so we can't have an identity. And in fact, we should probably eliminate whiteness. This is what a lot of other groups advocate for. So this is how the Republicans, the Republicans, normie Republicans, they really believed in this type of stuff. And now we have a situation here where Donnie won, and a couple of things here. I want to show you just a couple of graphs on this, or one graph on one statement. This is I think people have seen this. This is a white population in New York City. And at 1910, it was 98% white. And now, well, this is 2020, so this is 6 years later, is probably less, is 32% white. And I don't even know how they classify white anymore. It's probably really lower than that. And then we had this statement right after the election by the mayor elect. It said, Black and brown solidarity will overcome white supremacy. You notice he didn't say blacks, browns, and white people will all together to fight white supremacy, whatever the hell that means. No, it's black and brown. Zohran Mamdani sees this as explicitly racial terms, like we blacks and browns, we need to gang up on whitey, even though we may have our issues, because the whiteys, they're the real problem. And don't kid yourself. No matter how much you grovel to them, if you're white, you're still part of the white supremacist system. So even if you're batshit liberal, it doesn't matter. They still consider you genetically the enemy. You may be useful to them, but in the final analysis, they hate you and they want you and your kind gone. They're very explicit about it. So this is identity politics. And the typical conservative or Republican will say, well, we got to get rid of this identity politics. Well, like I said, that's like trying to tell a wolf that, no, wolves, you guys shouldn't be in wolf packs. You should just be individuals and just roam the forest, because wolves, they have different packs. And sometimes the packs, they will fight each other. And we should say, no, you shouldn't do that. You all bleed red. You're all wolves, right? You should just intermingle with all the other wolves. But that's not nature. That's not how it is. And that's not human nature. Throughout human history, that's never been the way it is. It's a biological thing. It's not a social construct. But the conservatives and Republicans, they somehow are led to believe lies, a premise that's wrong. And probably one of the biggest premises wrong that we were taught is that race and ethnicity is not really real. It's just a social construct. But it's not the case. It is biological, just like different breeds of dogs are. It's not a social construct. The difference between a pit bull and a poodle, there's real genetic differences. And it's not just a difference of fur color. Yeah, both dogs, both poodles and pit bulls, they all bleed red and they're all dogs and they can interbreed, but they're very different. They have different personality, they have different intelligence, and we accept that. And humans are no different. I don't know why people think humans should be different. And it's obviously there's differences. If you go around the world and see how civilizations have developed, it's really based on the people, the race or the ethnicity creates a different culture. As I've said a million times before, and I stand by this, if if we did a thought experiment, so let's just not even talk about white people, but we replaced everyone in Japan with Haitians, and then all the Japanese, we moved to Haiti overnight. Let's say there's a magical machine, we could do that. Well, quickly, Haiti would develop into a very prosperous island with all the Japanese there. And quickly, Japan would just fall apart into poverty and violence. That's because the people matter. People aren't interchangeable. There's differences among people, and it's biological. It doesn't mean that society or experience has no influence. It's just like with dogs. How you raise a dog makes a big difference. There's no doubt about it, but there's still a genetic component. If you have a dog that's like a Labrador Retriever, which I do, part lab, part pit, and he's got a lot of lab characteristics. He loves to chase sticks, just loves it. And he loves to retrieve. That's just genetic. I didn't teach him that. My other dog, a Cocker Spaniel, has no interest in playing catch. So a lot of this is just genetic. And that's the same way with people. And because you can think of an exception, like, oh, I have a black friend, or I have a Jewish friend, or I know an Asian is just totally different than others. Well, that's nice, but your deviation from the norm doesn't invalidate the norm. That's an important thing to understand. There are group differences, and you can't get around that. And if you change the people in a geographical area, it's all going to change. So if you bring in a lot of non-Americans or white people into New York City, it's going to look like where they came from. That's just how it is. It's always been that way. And Republicans and conservatives, so they bought the false premise that race isn't a real thing. It's not biological. And then they believe, well, even if they came here, they just need to be educated and they can assimilate. Well, not always. Mostly they can't. A lot of groups can't. Now, a few individuals can, but again, on the mass, it won't. And we've seen this everywhere. We've seen this in Europe. We've seen this in the United States. It holds true everywhere, almost without exception. And again, yes, you can find individual differences, but that is irrelevant. And so that is the reason what happened in New York City and why I always forget his name, Mamdani. It's partly because of I don't want to believe someone named Mamdani is mayor of New York City, but here we are. That's why Mamdani was elected. It had nothing to do with the Republicans' policies on healthcare or taxes or tariffs or Venezuela. And those issues are important, but that didn't mean shit. It's because the people in New York City are mostly not Americans, even though they are maybe technically citizens, they're not real Americans. And they are reverting to their homelands. And that is the issue there. It's just that simple. And no matter how much the Republicans, their idea to deal with this is, well, we just got to reach out to them and try to show them how if you embrace conservative values of low taxes and a free enterprise system and traditional American values like free speech, all that type of stuff, and it'll work out. It'll work out. But uh, the conservatives, they've tried that, and Republicans with like the black population my whole life, and it hasn't worked at all. At all. Blacks are still over 90% Democrat, and their behavior has not changed whatsoever because, again, it mostly has a biological component. And yeah, I know Thomas Sowell and all that. You can give all those exceptions, but again, on the whole, it hasn't made any difference. And so there's no way to fix this through reaching out because what they're really trying to do is to change these people into white people. Because a lot of Americans, whites, both liberals and conservatives, they meant well, but they thought around the world you could get a savage out of New Guinea from the jungle, but secretly inside there's a white person. We just have to educate him, train him, and then he'll be just like a white person. But it's just really naive, and there's no basis for that. So this is what we're seeing now. And we see this a lot in the debate of illegal versus legal immigration. And even Trump did this a lot. You know, Trump opposes illegal immigration. And the reason he does is because, oh, well, some of them are criminals, real bad hombres. And we got mental insane people and drug addicts or whatever. But he never mentions that, well, no, wait a minute. The problem is most of these people are not white. They're from the third world and they're not going to assimilate into our values. It doesn't matter if they're not rapists or killers or whatever. That's the problem, right? So, yeah, white South Africans can assimilate, black South Africans can't because they're different biologically. That's the issue. So, our immigration policy, we don't want to bring in people that on the whole can assimilate. Again, there's exceptions, but this is our policy. You can't do that because that would be called, again, racist, right? So, they're scared of that word. So, they have to do all this weird contortions to make it, well, I don't want to be called racist. So how do I try to prevent these people from coming in without me, no, it's not about race. It's about education or religion or, they really try to, they can't square the circle and they get real frustrated. And so this has been a big problem. And we see this now because it used to be just a few years ago, almost all Republicans, their big mantra is, well, I'm against illegal immigration, but we're for legal immigration. You don't hear so many say that anymore because people like me and others were like, oh, okay, so you're okay with your homeland being destroyed as long as it's done legally, right? So that's your thing. And it's so ridiculous, right? Because what happened in New York City was not because of illegals, and don't get me wrong, illegals should be sent out, but it's because of legal immigration that caused that. That's it. And Republicans could never oppose that because they were scared of being called racist. And so if you don't have your people, you don't have self-determination. And it's going to destroy you in a democracy. And again, you can have a handful over. It's like the Jews in Israel. If they allowed everyone in their country, it would no longer be a Jewish state. They understand that. They don't have any illusions. That's why they protect their borders. But we never understood that, or a lot of the conservatives never understood that. And it's even with the whole Israel thing, is they're like, oh, well, if we just kiss their ass, maybe they won't give us bad press, or we'll get the funding and all that. But in general, that lobby is not for on our side for issues that are important. Mostly the mass immigration, a lot of them support and actually are the leaders of, and a lot of the stuff we don't like feminism, the pornography, the um, the whole transgenderism, pushing all that sort of stuff, the racial spoil system, and a lot of the censorship when it comes to political discussion. And and again, I love people like Stephen Miller and so forth, but in general, if you're going to tie yourself to that Israeli lobby, they fundamentally disagree with the basis of what we stand for as a country. And so that's the problem. So these Republicans, and a lot of them are, I think they try to be good people, but they're trying to say, hey, I want the America that existed years ago, but I don't want to be called these bad words. And so I got to work in this environment that we restore America, but I got to be careful I'm never called a racist or an anti Semite. But then if they're honest, they run into a brick wall and they said, well, there's just no way forward then. There's just no way to solve this issue. Because I have to bring in the whole world legally, and I have to always give my loyalty to Israel first, otherwise I'm going to be called an evil anti-Semite, then you can't have an America first. You can't win. There's just no way. And I don't mean that trying to be black pill. There's just no way, because you bought into the premise of the enemy, the premise that they gave you, that we have these certain words that just apply to you, white people. It doesn't work on us. So calling us racist, we don't give a shit. Call us racist, we'll laugh at you. We don't care. It's just for you. And same with anti-Semitism. There's no opposite word for that. They just laugh at you. But we bought into it, and we got to stop buying into that at all. We got to understand that these words, so when anyone says the word racist or anti-Semitic or any of those other words, we got to say those words are inherently anti-white. I'm not going to deal on that. All people have identity. They want their culture. They want their homelands. The Jewish people do. All other people do. We have the same rights. So if the Jewish people have a right to Israel, and let's say Nigerians have a right to their country, well, then the Germans have a right to Germany. And the white English have the right to Britain. In the Americas, we have a right to our country too. And we don't have to apologize for it. It doesn't mean we're going to be given it and maybe a fight for it. And I get that. But we got to get out of these mental traps that people have placed upon us. And the conservative movements in this big civil war now, by those that are trying to tone police, because they see, especially younger people, are no longer, now we're not going to play by these rules that you've set up to us that ensure we always lose. And make no mistake, all the conservatives and Republicans, they have continually lost. We were losing this country by immigration primarily, and all this other stuff, by following that playbook, by playing by the rules that were imposed by us. We can't win by playing by the rules that are rigged against our people. But you have these conservatives that are still trying to enforce these rules, like the Heritage Foundation. They're requiring people to go through struggle sessions because they don't love Israel enough, and all this other stuff. Oh, wait, oh, no, wait. It's really the left. They're the real racist. It doesn't work. That's so stupid. Okay. And I hope we can get beyond that. We just have to understand that these words have been weaponized by the enemies to be used against white people. We can't give those words power by validating them by saying, oh, I'm not racist. I have a black friend. Oh, I'm not anti Semitic. I have a Jewish friend. We got to stop that. We got to stop that. We got to say we're like any other group that advocates for ourselves. Doesn't mean we hate other people, but other groups advocate for other groups. Perfectly fine. We have the same right to do that. And until the mainstream Republican Party and the conservatives adopt that, they're just going to lose. There is no hope for victory. There's absolutely none. It's rigged against them. So this is what we're facing right now. Talk to you guys later.